So we're going to start in our next one. This one is a value-added ag transforming our local communities. I'll be moderating, so I'd like to ask Dave Sigler from the owner and director of sales for Bridger Brewing, and Steve Fairs, chief operating officer for High Country Snack Foods, to join me. So now we get to talk about food, and I think everybody in here loves food. Why don't briefly, we'll start with you. Give a little background on High Country Snack Foods and kind of your background, how you got involved in the value-added ag industry.
High Country Snack Foods has been in business since 1976, making game seasonings and jerky primarily, so been there a long time. I thought I was going to retire about 6.5 years ago, and I did for 6 months, and long story short, the previous owner, Jim Johnson, I ran into him one day, got to talking to him, and he wondered if I wanted to go back to work, wanted a job, so that's the long and the short of how I got into this. I said, yeah, I'll come out and go to work.
So, thank you. Dave.
David Sigler, Bridger Brewing. Got into, I guess, value ag. I like to think of it as beer. Met a neighbor when our sons met, and we were having a fire pit in the backyard almost 20 years ago, and said, boy, what this town needs is a brew pub. Montana didn't have some of the highest per capita breweries at the time, and that community gathering place, that pub culture, that place where just everyone's welcome, ideas exchange, the place where our Constitution was written over a beer in the day is kind of a foundational piece, and there was some hurdles to it in Montana with the three-tiered system, but I'd recently passed some legislation that allowed the taproom exception, so that manufacturing breweries could sell pints in their establishment. Limitations, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., 3 pints per person, and but the beauty of it is that was enough. A lot of people say, how do you thrive in that? But it gave us a chance to support your local communities, that value-add ag, that sense of community and pride in Montana, and little breweries opened up all over Montana. And quickly, Montana was the second most breweries per capita in the country, behind Vermont. I think they've slid to third behind Maine now, but it's a testament to the pride in those communities to have something Montana made and someplace they can gather and rally, and trying to be a part of that felt like a mission, and so worked with my now one of 2 business partners, and we just had to figure out how to get it open without any money. So that's a different story though. But we opened it in 2013, just had our 10th anniversary, and just opened a large-scale manufacturing facility out in Three Forks, Montana. That is also a long story and a different story. So.
Great, thank you. Dave, we'll stick with you. So how do you personally define value added in your industry vertical, and what creates a value added product?
Value added, it can certainly be thought of in a traditional sense as, you take our Montana grains and we're grown, and you enhance a product and you sell it. The margins on the commodity basis aren't great. It's hard to make a living as in agriculture without having some sort of value add. But on a bigger picture, what I've looked at a micro scale and a macro scale is the value added is truly how do you add value to just a commodity agricultural product, and a lot of it is how you've grown it, how you embrace your community, keeping things locally sourced, how you add value when you can, we have Jake Tassell. We worked with him. He was the first person who turned his family's farm, next generation. You talk about your entrepreneurs and people wanting to stay, and turned into a hop farm. Got some grants and pelletized some hops. And yes, technically making the hops, he's added a value to the product, but what is the value of those hops in our beer to be grown in our valley and to be added to our beer? Every step along the way is value added. Your farmer's market, people will pay a premium for those. Those are value added. They haven't changed the form of the product. So as much as we support local, support community, I think that adds the most value along the way.
Great, thank you.
Something very similar. Basically, anything that we can do to change or alter the product, the raw materials that we buy, that the consumer is going to pay for, of course, is going to add value to that. So we start with the best product that we can buy, which is Montana beef, primarily Montana beef. It all comes out of Butte, Montana, the majority of it, and to a lesser degree pork, and we season that, marinate it, run it through the smokers, and then ship it mostly regionally, but quite a bit of it other parts of the state. But again, as he'd mentioned there as well, supporting local Montana ranchers, supporting local Montana communities. Montana sells. It does. Montana sells. So that adds value right there, almost just by the fact that we buy Montana and support Montana, other Montana businesses.
Great, thank you. I've worked in the beef industry for a little while, and the meat and brewing industries, historically have been known as large users of water, and as we've seen recently, there's pressure on the water supply, and especially in the Mountain West. So, can you each tell us what you've done in your companies to address water conservation and wastewater disposal, and what hurdles did you have to overcome doing that with the amount of water that's needed in your industries? Mike, or Steve, I'm sorry.
Well, for us, it's a little bit difficult. Being from the Lincoln Valley, we're fortunate there at least that we're not really restricted on water yet. However, the majority of the water that we use is in cleaning, and so that in a way that takes what it takes. And so primarily about the only thing we've been able to do so far is restrict the nozzle size for the flow. We've got leach fields that we pump out into, and so right now we really haven't been affected by what a lot of the rest of the state has.
Great, thanks.
Sure, and thank you, Shane. He kind of teed this one up for me. I think it was a loaded question. I'll start with, frankly, on the brewery side. The brewery industry has been very sensitive to these. The historical ratio of water to beer made, that used to be in that 10 to 12 to 1. Most are getting it down in that 6 or 8 to 1, and good breweries are getting it down in that 2 to 4 to 1. There's a lot of things we do. We have an advanced brew house. We're recycling our water through our processes, and we flush cans in the canning with iodized air instead of water. There's a lot of screening inside processes. We've got a pretty advanced Krohn Steinecker brew house that's highly automated for high yield and efficiency, and it's also the only German Steinecker brew house made in America over in Wisconsin. So, but I guess the biggest net save. I don't know if anybody noticed in my bio that includes owning a utility district. I got to be honest; it was not a personal or professional ambition to ever own a utility district. Wasn't part of the plan. What started as a public utility district, kind of working to really develop that intersection. Again, a story for another time. Ended up in our lap. But along the way, what we really wanted for this district was to capture, reclaim, treat all wastewater, not just from our project, but from everyone there. We treat it down to non-potable standards, but the cleanest DEQ on it's cleaner than what's coming out of the well after it runs through membranes and disinfections, and we reuse it. So that's being reused within the whole district for toilets, we have a rest area that's looking to connect that'll be a net zero. Toilets go down, treat, come back. But we're the first utility district to reuse water through those. So, which gets us effectively a kind of a net almost zero waste. In addition, and I also cheating because my partners, when we met in the backyard, both civil engineers, so I've been a licensed PE for almost 20 years here in Montana. And so it gives you insights and ambitions on what something ought to look like. We also have a net water drainage that kind of runs through the property, small drainage area that mostly catches that early spring and winter ice and freeze and runoffs and just kind of floods and creates a hazard. And so there's an opportunity to create a large stormwater overflow retention pond that recharges into my aquifer so far, probably my next 5 or 6 years worth of water use. So ultimately in our process, we're reusing, reclaiming any wastewater, and we're recharging more than we're pulling up. So I can actually have a negative beer ratio. So and that feels important. There were certainly hurdles. There was a lot of anxiety within the DEQ to reuse the reclaimed water. And so a process that they insisted should take 2 weeks took a year and a half, and wasn't done when we were nearly completed with our building, and ended up costing us a lot of kind of time and money, and got through. And it turns out now that I got 3 tiers of disinfection more in my toilet water than I do in my drinking water. So. But conservation of water is, you're right, it was important to us, so we've kind of hit it at all levels.
Great, thank you. So tell us, why is value-added ag manufacturing important to the state of Montana? And what can we as a state and chamber do to grow this important sector? Steve, you want to?
Sure. Ag, I believe, is still the largest economic sector in the state of Montana. So obviously, there's a lot of value there. The cattle industry in particular, the majority of the cattle are exported out of the state for additional processing. So one of the things, obviously, is to try to keep those cattle in the state of Montana and add that value to them and process them there into a form that the consumer is going to pay for, that the consumer is going to buy. Right now, that doesn't happen. So one of the single largest issues, at least that we face in Lincoln, in terms of adding value to Montana beef, is the access to capital, the access to affordable capital, and to streamline some of those processes so that we can get through the bureaucracy, if you will, to be able to scale, be able to buy the automation, which in turn is going to be able to allow us to pay good wages in rural Montana. And so that's, I think, really the short of it, is to be able to further process that items here through the access to capital.
Great, thank you.
No, I mean, if we're asking why value-added ag is important in Montana, I mean, it is an ag state. And as we know, as that commodity, as I noted earlier, making a living on pure ag is really tough, especially for our small farmers. And when we talk about our kids in an ag state staying here, and we've done a much better job of finding ways for them to stay here, but our farm and our ag kids, you wondered why we have so many entrepreneurs. It's these kids trying to stay here, and if they can do value-added ag, if they can support that, then there's an opportunity for them to stay, to thrive. I've been working with the farmer Frank Groneweg, that bought the old Wheat Montana farms, and I've ridden with him in his combine, and he has got his 15-year-old daughter loading up the truck, and his 16-year-old son running the other combine, and trying to find ways of keeping them here, and is working on whole health and bringing products over, and we're trying to incorporate them at our pub. He's got a flour with an heirloom wheat that is not having any gluten reactions. He's got a canola oil that he's crushing, and talked with him on trying to create more education, working with SWIMBA, tying bike trails over to let him see what he's growing and try and tie his products, and how can we support our neighbors in our community, give them a chance with those value ads between education and recognition that it's locally sourced, and between literal ads on improving products, and to support our farmers and their families. The value ag is essential. How do we do it? Really it comes to those 4 pillars, and I'd say of your 4 pillars, that the infrastructure, workforce, and your entrepreneur are probably the strongest, because that's what's at the ground roots level. The business climate is great. We can attract businesses in. As the business grows, it can be more successful, but how do we help them be successful? How do we cultivate? How do we support Montana small businesses? It's supporting infrastructure. That's a sensitive one to me because my utility district story. That workforce, how are we able to find a workforce as you're a small business and you're starting up, and it is tricky, and I think it's getting out of the box. How do we identify and recruit and pull people into the workforce? Just poaching it around in a circle is not successful, or trying to outbid people is not successful. How do we be creative on pulling them in? How do we find the working mom or the stay-at-home mom and pull her into the workforce by supporting that, and can also support some poverty cycles within that. We've worked, I've tried to work within our commercial park, trying to build around our brewery to try and foster that community, work at the tax increment to try to create a commercial owner association that contributes towards a daycare, subsidized daycare facility for workers within it. Training those people. I've tried to have conversations with Gallatin College on trying to bring tech schools. They are, for as much as we talk about training and the wonderful things they've done to attract businesses, they have 10% of the office space or classroom space per student of the national average. I've talked to them, they're looking for hundreds of thousands of square footage to try to support and grow students. They've run into barricades at the state level on some funding, and I've tried to offer to give them land out there and create a campus for them. We've tried to work with businesses to do an interactive workforce where we can train and bring businesses in, and that progressive thinking has been, is what will also not just help us grow internally, but attract those big, sophisticated businesses we're trying to pull to Montana. I've had, piggybacking on Jenny's presentation, they had a German company that came out that was real interested in being a neighbor, and came over and talked to them. Went out to Atlanta to kind of meet with them, and they're giving their presentations and trying to interview with us, and their approach was so different. It was refreshing. As we're going to get ready and launch into what we can offer at our place and our people, and we introduce who we are, this German CEO and his CFO, and when they introduce themselves, they talk about their family and their community and their values and what they believe in, and how in their training culture they have daycare is built in. What was important to them was they wanted to be able to have a daycare facility for their people, and they bring the kids in during their training and name equipment after them, and they have a long intern program where they tap into your local communities and they build and create culture. And it just made me smile. It's like, yes, I want you as a neighbor. And when it come to workforce for them, as much as you can say we have a challenged workforce, I could smile at them and look and say, you will have no problem with your workforce. If you create that culture and you support people and you bring them in and train, you will have so many hardworking Montana kids that'll give you all you got. And he was excited. Now, ultimately, the hurdles we had there was, the cost of land here and needing, that's when he needed support to offset that on some of that business climate. Those are, and I'm, I guess, getting in circles away from our farm ag, but how do we support those? Same thing, the last one's your entrepreneurs. We said in the talk earlier that we had entrepreneurs and had such a high percentage in Montana and didn't understand why, but trying to embrace it, and it doesn't surprise me at all. We're only scratching the surface on what those are. There's opportunity here, as you say, as you come up from farms, you want to add ag, these kids that don't want to leave. There is money and interest in people that want to come into Montana. There's opportunities for them to take advantage of. More would do it if they knew they could. A lot of these kids grow up on this ag and they're not wired that mindset. How do we support that? We find ways to fund, to finance, to believe in them, and that becomes a banking hurdle on getting out of your traditional molds and equities and making sure that as long as they don't need the money, you can lend it to them. And Montana banks, I think, were great at a time of getting beyond that, and I think we've gotten stagnant on that, and finding ways to support people and funding and financing. That is how you support your entrepreneur. That is your 4 pillars in action that's going to take in order to support that value-added ag.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is a yes or no, but I'm going to follow up to the answer. Is there a premium that can be obtained for a made in Montana value-added ag product? And regardless of how you answer, tell us why you answer that way. And I think, Steve, you've already touched on that a bit, but.
Well, absolutely. There's value added to Montana products. One of the things we try to focus on at High Country through the Trading Post and our online presence is selling a wide range of Montana products. Montana's always had an appeal, I think, and it's got an appeal nationwide, and I think more so than basically any other state, at least any other state that I know of. Because, I mean, how often do you hear of other states pushing their products? I don't very often, right? So, but Montana, we've got how many millions of people come here every year, specifically, as tourists come through the state, and everybody that comes through, they want to buy something that's made in Montana. And so, yeah, Montana sells. It definitely has an appeal, definitely has an allure, and that's one of those things that we try to push for a variety of reasons. One, because Montana sells, but again, Montana helping Montanans, which we've always heard. So the more we can sell, obviously, through the Trading Post or online presence, the more we help Montana businesses. Obviously, the more that helps the state and everybody across the state.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here. I think certainly Montana sells. We made a very deliberate dialogue on as we were branding and getting ready to expand and do our brewing operation. Do we emphasize on being in the mountains, being in the Rockies, being in the outdoors, or do we specify that to Montana? And we all came to the same one. There's a passion and a love and an ideal for Montana that resonates. When you're out at breweries across states, if you're in Seattle, you may be defensive about an Oregon beer, and in Oregon maybe a Seattle beer, and nobody wants a California beer, but everybody's curious about a Montana beer. And right now you got that whole Yellowstone series, which is certainly catapulted us. And so the question is, how do we take advantage of that? Because you're right, people want it. Right now we are mostly selling that want and love of Montana to people in Montana when they come visit to Montana. Where there's a shortage and an opportunity to support is exporting that in Montana. People can take it home with them. And I've seen that, we're trying to grow into that niche. Our pub can only do our pub, and we're trying to grow into that production in a safe way. But as we talk to trucking companies, and they give me a flat rate to truck beer anywhere around the state, and I was like, that's kind of weird. I thought it would be like a mileage or a per pallet. And I said, well, when I want to go across state and start moving my beer out, that's going to cost more, right? And the one guy says, yeah, and then his boss, she says, no. We can do that cheaper because we have so many. Montana's such a dead-end state. We got so many empty trucks leaving it. The backhaul the opportunity to get our products into other states, and to, when they come up for their tourists, they come up for their great experience, they're going to be looking for it, and when they see it in their state. So I think there's an opportunity for our Montana Value Ag. We're starting to see, Wheat Montana's done that. And others have tinkered in it, but our ag is loved. I think our beef products, we talk about that opportunity to sell Montana, and I got into these a little bit as I got into my utility district hat, and people are saying, hey, what you've learned, we'd love to do, be able to render and produce and keep all our beef in state instead of sending it out, and really grow a Montana brand and product that people can say grown, raised, and finished here in Montana, and then you can charge a premium. You talk about a value added that besides rendering it, that brand you can sell for Montana, forget your Wagyu beef, these are Montana beefs, and there's opportunities there that are still ready to be taken advantage of.
Great, thanks. Well, we need to wrap up. I really want to thank both of you for this really important topic and your thoughts on it. I will say I'm a fan of both of your products. I get to see you more often, but some of us call our south office in Bozeman, but I appreciate the conversation, and please help thank our panelists this afternoon, Steve.